Dr. Kate Darling is a leading expert in robot ethics and policy. She's a researcher at the MIT Media Lab, where she investigates social robotics, conducts experimental studies on human-robot interaction, and explores the emotional connection between people and lifelike machines. You know, I got that from your website, but you might want to add something.
I haven't updated my website for a while. I actually just started a new job. I'm still at MIT. I'm still a research scientist at MIT, but I'm also at the Boston Dynamics AI Institute and leading their ethics and society research team.
Oh, thank you. Great, great. Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, I have some colleagues in the audience too.
Playwright Francisco Mendoza is an Argentinian writer currently living in Brooklyn. His play Machine Learning, as you've heard, premieres January 25th at Central Square Theatre in Cambridge as part of CST's Science Theater partnership with MIT Catalyst Collaborative. I think you also are involved in professionals in the theater industry who are, performance industry, who are immigrants?
Yes,
Right.
that's right. I have a coalition of immigrant theater makers, and we advocate for erasing barriers that keep immigrants behind.
One of the reasons that's relevant is that machine learning, which is about, well, machine learning, is also very much about relationships, and two of the core, well, immigration is one of the important themes.
No spoilers.
So, my name is Debra Wise. Although I'm currently Associate Artistic Director of an organization called The Revels, I'm here because I'm one of the founders of Catalyst Collaborative at MIT, the science theater partnership between Central Square Theatre and MIT. Yay, yes. So a question for both Kate and Francisco. It's just really a general question, but what interests you in particular about her, and how do you relate the themes of this film to your work? That's a huge question and impossible to answer.
How much time do we have?
But just generally, you were seeing it again, there might be some things that have really struck you.
I mean,
You've written about this film.
I've spoken about this film, written about this film. I've been obsessed with this film since I saw it in the movie theater when it came out. I mean, first of all, it's just such a beautiful film. And I think, it's probably a little bit obvious to say, but this is not a film about technology. This is a film about relationships. And as such, I think it is so well done and just gorgeous. I think, so when it comes to the technology element, there's some pieces. Okay, so how it relates to my work is I'm less interested in the AIs, getting intelligent and then piecing out at the end. Like, that's a nice departure from the trope of them becoming intelligent and killing us all. But I think so my work has been around human-machine relationships and the societal effects of those. And so I think what's really interesting about this film is that it gets a lot of things right, I think, and is very prescient in some ways. And then there's one thing that I wouldn't say it gets wrong, but if I had made this movie, there's definitely a question that I would add to it. So one of the things it gets right, is it okay if I spend a minute on this? Okay.
Yes.
I could talk about this for 2 hours, but I'll try to keep it short. Okay. One of the things it gets right is, and I got this wrong. So when I saw this movie, so 2013, I was like, okay, I don't know when this movie is set. We don't know when that is, but it's near future, right? There's no way we're gonna have chatbots that sophisticated, even just from a language perspective, right? Like, back in 2013, I wanna say Siri was still like, you would be, Siri, can you call me an ambulance? And Siri would be like, sure, from now on, I will call you an ambulance. And she would rename you, right? So I didn't anticipate this happening. What I did anticipate, or do anticipate happening, and this movie anticipates happening, is that people will develop emotional relationships to chatbots. And that is something that in my field, human-robot interaction, and in the field of human-computer interaction, we've anticipated for many, many decades. So trivia question, what's the name of the chatbot that Joseph Weizenbaum developed at MIT in the 60s? Eliza. Okay, so Eliza was super simple, right? Eliza would just answer everything with a question. You would tell it something, it would be like, how does that make you feel? And people will tell it all kinds of stuff, right? So Joseph Weizenbaum wrote about this back in the 60s and 70s, that this was gonna happen. And I think what the movie does really well is, it's not like this is happening to some incel living in his mother's basement, right? This is happening to someone who's maybe introverted and like struggles with some things, but it's happening to a lot of people, and I think that's also gonna be true. So I think we, as a society, we should pretty quickly stop making fun of like the Google engineer who thinks the AI is sentient and people who develop relationships to these chatbots, because I think we're all vulnerable in certain ways to these types of relationships. We're very relational creatures. We're human. I think this is just something that we will fold into our relationships very, very easily. And I don't think there's a problem with that. I love that the movie is so non-judgmental about it. But what I do think is a problem, and here's the thing that I would make a movie about, which is there's that moment where she goes offline and he can't reach her. And I remember watching in the movie theater and being like, yes, finally, now we're gonna get to the question of what this company is that is selling these operating systems. And now they're gonna be like, oh, you wanna get your operating system back? You're gonna have to pay $10,000 for a mandatory software upgrade. So I think the potential for these relationships to be exploited by companies, by governments, by anyone, I think that's totally something that's going to happen and that we need to be very mindful of as we move forward into this future.
Thanks. So, Francisco, you, and by the way, we'll talk for like another, I don't know, 6 minutes or so, and then we'll open up to questions, comments. You've just written this great play, which is about a very different relationship, and yet your play is really about that relationship. And I'm just wondering, what struck you?
Well, the first thing that struck me is that I'm covered in cat hair, which I did not realize was going to be the case, and I apologize. Central Square is housing me while I'm here in the play, and I got to bring my cat with me, so ergo, all the cat. Anyway, this movie was breaking my brain when I was watching it again. I was like, oh my God, I'm thinking of so many things at the same time. Actually, she said something like that in the movie, that like, oh, she's having so many thoughts. I was like, I'm right there with you. It is, I did not remember how sad the movie was, and how it really is, to me, about loneliness. It spoke to a phenomena that I think comes from the internet, which is in itself a machine of sorts. This idea that I think of the internet as this like canvas where we can paint our fantasies, but it has this aura of reality to it because it feels like it was made by other people. And I love that scene where he goes on the date because it really explores the dynamic of like, as long as they can project into each other, like they can imagine each other being their fantasy people, the date is going great, but the moment she asks a question that involves any sort of responsibility, sort of the spell breaks. She is a person who has needs, and therefore the date is kind of over. And to her, I think also, you know, even from her end, she wants from him something that he couldn't give, because he can say, yeah, I'll call you tomorrow, and then never call. But in that moment, there's like an answer that she's looking for that will perpetuate the fantasy and that spell breaking. I feel like that is such a, I think that's a human phenomenon. He says that. He talks about the honeymoon phase, and what I think, like, you know, the honeymoon phase is the moment where we know the other person the least, because we can still see them as we want them. The honeymoon phase ends the moment we see the other person clearly as someone separate from ourselves. And technology plays such a role in that. Technology really allows us, I think, when we think of like the magic of ChatGPT, the magic of ChatGPT is that it has heard a bunch of people talking, and it can talk like all those people that it heard talking, but it creates this illusion in our brains that like, oh, this is something new, this is someone new. And it really does, like the movie really digs into that. Like he is so happy with her while she is the fantasy, and then eventually he comes to resent her for that. Oh, you don't have a body. He starts doubting himself because his wife, right, ex-wife, really digs into him of like, of course, your perfect partner is, and that insecurity, he takes it out on her. Oh, I'm gonna isolate her because, you know, she is my fantasy, but she's not real enough. Like, the fantasy breaks if you see the sort of structure of it. It was way sadder than I remember, and I love that it ends with a moment of human connection, of coming back to that friendship. Machine learning, interesting enough, I was thinking this movie is so focused on romantic relationships because the romantic relationships that are chosen relationships, whereas machine learning really focuses on a father-son relationship, and it feels like a different kind of love. But in some ways, they have a lot of things in common. I remember seeing this movie in theaters, but I don't remember a lot of it, but I'm sure it has influenced my own writing. Because there's a lot in this movie that shows up in machine learning, the way that, like, the algorithm allows them to, in a true way, access other versions of the person, but also imagine it, or fantasize about it, or create this illusion that, like, oh, he's gonna say what I want him to say, or which I think is so ingrained in this movie in a way that I didn't remember.
One thing I was struck by watching the film, and then I'm going to ask what you all were thinking, is how the relationship with the operating system seems to have helped him grow, and he seems aware of it, which is a good thing. And I like to think that. Is it a real relationship? Is one question that was asked at some point during the film, and. I don't know about you all, but I feel like I'm in plenty of relationships that I don't enable myself to say, this is helping me grow, and sort of aware, I'm not reflective that way about a relationship. That's a gift. And it made me wonder about the relationship between your AI, Arnold, and the father, and his creator, Jorge, and wondering if they change each other. But maybe they should see the play.
It's funny that you mentioned, like, that ending where they leave. That ending is one of the things that I always remember from this movie. In some ways, it's a defiance of the sort of Pinocchio narrative, right? Pinocchio spends the entire story of Pinocchio being sad that he is a puppet and he wants to be a human being. And if you look at it critically, he doesn't necessarily miss out on anything from being a puppet. Like, he goes on a huge adventure. Like, being a puppet isn't necessarily a bad thing. He just wants to be a person. And I've always appreciated that this movie, like, the puppet doesn't become a real boy. It grows beyond. I think that it comes with an understanding of, like, our desires do stem in some part from our bodies, if I want pleasure, it's interesting how much sex is in the movie, but, like, yes, because I have a brain that is wired with some neurons that connect to the rest of my body and make sex a pleasurable thing, a machine would eventually, I imagine, and as it shows, like, become frustrated with that, because, like, I have learned this desire from someone else and reflected it back on me, but eventually I'm like, I don't have a body, and maybe I will have more fun making some code with my fellow AIs. Like, I always like that ending. And I don't want to spoil my play, but there's also that moment of, like, what is the harsh difference at the end of the day between the creator and the creature? Like, I was thinking, it's kind of dark thought, but I was watching this movie, I was thinking it's interesting that Frankenstein's monster wants a partner. That is the thing that he fights with Dr. Frankenstein about. And I think that delineation in the sand of, like, I am different from you and we'll eventually want different things, because the desire to be like you will eventually, they'll rise up and kill us because they want what we have. I like that this movie has, like, a different version of that. It's like, well, maybe they'll ride off into the sunset with a different perspective. And yes, specifically to bring it back to the growth, I think that it isn't, I do think he grows. As cynical as I've clearly been in my analysis of the movie, I do think that he grows. But I think that growth comes from finally being challenged on sort of that expectation, of the partner. And I think it is essential that she leave for him to have that growth,
Mm-hmm.
for someone not to conform
Yeah.
to that fantasy.
Kate, before I open up to the audience, I wonder if you have anything to say that.
I love that the defiance of the Pinocchio narrative. Like, I never thought about it that way. I think my frustration with movies where the AI becomes super intelligent is that that always happens in movies where we see these like human-machine relationships, but what we know from the research is that it can be a really dumb AI. Like, it doesn't need to have sentience, it doesn't need to be smart or have emotion for people to develop what is a very real, I would say real relationship. It's not like a mutual two-sided relationship, but it is a very real relationship that people can develop, and we don't see that a lot in these movies.